And hello and welcome everyone to this second webinar, this webinar run by the TED and the EUD together for all communication professionals and enthusiasts from across the continent, really across Europe. Thank you so much for your time. Today we have two very special guests and we're very excited. But before I introduce them to you, I want to let you know how this works. Basically, we're going to have about 40 minutes or so for them to talk about the topic for today. And then we will open a time for questions and answers, which you can send via the chat here. Okay, so today we have Simret and we have Tihi with us. I am going to read a short bio from each of them so you get to know a little bit more about them. We're very lucky to have them. These are two very special guests. So let me read a little bit about Simret. He is the founder and director of Presence Culture Lounge, and this is a center in Frankfurt City, which offers a variety of cultural, spiritual, and life-related activities. So individuals are invited to come in and encounter life, encounter each other, and of course, encounter God. And he is also a pastor at the Frankfurt Central Church in Germany, here in Germany. And his background is in theology and also in transcultural studies. Welcome, Simret. It's so great to have you with us. Thank you so much for the time. I wonder if you can tell us a fun fact about you before I introduce also Tihi.
Thank you very much for having me. My fun fact is I'm in a community of communicators improvising with my devices. So improvisation may be part of my journey. Well, that shared maybe not a fun fact, but an inspirational source is John Coltrane. He's a jazz saxophonist. And I was listening to Giant Steps. That was a groundbreaking album made by him back in the 50s. And for me, that music is a source of consolation and prayer and joy. So not that fun, but something that has been carrying me through this day.
Thank you.
I think music, improvisation as well.
Yeah. Music and improvisation are two very important skills in life. Thank you so much. Let me read a little bit about Tihi. He is a senior lecturer in systematic theology at Newbold College in the UK and the former director of campus ministries, public campus ministries by the Trans-European Division, a program run by the Trans-European Division. And he earned a doctorate in theology at the University of Oxford and specializes in contemporary ecclesiology. Thank you, Tihi, for your time. I wonder if you want to say something fun or that we don't know about you.
I don't know whether you know that I actually trained karate.
Oh, wow.
Not as a necessity for my job, but rather when I was a kid, yeah.
I'm glad it's not a necessity for your job. I'm glad that's not a necessity for your job. So welcome to you both and welcome again to everybody. Today we are talking about open hearts, open minds. And so I would love to hear from each one of you, Tihi and Simret. What does it mean to you? Open hearts, open minds. What is to share the gospel or indeed the impact of the gospel in your life with open hearts and open minds? If either of you wants to get started, go for it.
Would you like to start?
Thank you, T. Thank you for giving me the challenge. Open hearts, open minds. It is a very challenging state of mind for me to have an open heart and open mind, especially when it comes to things that stretch me, that question me, when it comes to places I don't want to go to, right? And for me, the gospel experience, in a way, is an experience of being taken to places I don't really want to go, but I need to go. Yeah. And as such, to have the courage to let go and face the reality of the gospel as it is revealed in my Master, Jesus Christ, has always been a challenge for me. Starting over 20 years ago, when I sensed his open arms to embrace me as I am. And that also implicated that I needed to face who I am. So that was the tougher part, right? So when I actually had the courage to do so, to face the unpleasant sides of my journey, that's when his acceptance and his sight of me was even more powerful. As such, open heart and open mind is for me something through which I face reality and I face Christ. And it's been going for the past over 20 years, as far as I can consciously recall, going from identity layer to identity layer of being confronted, challenged.
In qualche modo, qui stiamo parlando di un confronto.
Deal with, and depending on where I am in my journey, that's what I give to to the individuals with whom I engage, and that's where I also try to allow myself be stretched by others as well.
So it sounds, you said courage so many times. You said the word courage so many times. It sounds like a journey of integrity, emotional, spiritual integrity, and authenticity and self-discovery. Tihi, does this resonate with you? What about you?
Yes, I like the idea of courage, because it's not all about intellectual consent, that you know something or something about somebody. The gospel actually draws you in existentially also, not only intellectually, but it requires not only consent, but also life commitment. And it's a fuller way of knowing. It's not only propositional, it's not only cognitive, it actually engages the whole life response. It's relational knowing. New Testament likes to talk about epignosis. Gnosis is kind of cognitive knowing, but epignosis is more rounded, well-rounded experiential knowledge of God. And Apostle Paul talks about it, that this epignosis, this experiential, fuller knowledge, actually everything else is, he says, everything else is kubalan, everything else is useless. It's rubbish comparing to this knowledge. So I think this gospel doesn't leave you standing as a spectator of your own life on a side. You're never left there non-committal, in a non-committal neutral state. You're whether in or out. Gospel goes breaks through barriers of the mind. It goes through the level of our emotions. It goes to a level of our action. It permeates the entire life. I would see Christian life as a whole life response to God. We respond with everything that we are to everything that God is. As Simret says, we'll find ourselves in different situations, God being somebody different in different situations for us. And the key question is who God is here in this situation, in this city, in this town, in this environment, among these people. Who is he for me, and who I am for him? So it engages a full life. So I really like this focus on existential, experiential knowledge. And theology is a part of it. Definitely there is a reason why there is part of cognition and understanding that with clarity, but knowing goes deeper. Relational knowing, epignosis goes much deeper than just intellectual knowledge. It engages our intuitions, engages our heart, engages our disposition of our heart and orientation, allegiance. So it's all there.
I'm taking notes of what you're saying. I wish we had like 3 hours, because it's just flagging so many things. So some of the things you said sounded a bit like embodiment, because you're talking about like intuition, so engaging the whole body, not just up here, but like a whole body experience. Yeah. And so I wonder if you want to share, do you think this is what we're doing as a church? Do you think this is the kind of message we are sharing? Are we actually sharing it in a full experience capacity, or are we sharing intellectual knowledge?
Who would like to start?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, yeah. Go ahead,
okay.
Please.
Okay,
please.
This time. I think that our movement, I can't talk about generally Adventism, because Adventism is different in different countries and different environments. So I'm not here to adjudicate the movement as a whole. There is not monolith Adventism that is all the same, but there is a general trend that emerges from the fact that we were children of Enlightenment period and certain emphasis that comes with it. particularly the primacy of reason and cognition and proposition and doctrines and this kind of scholastic, or not even scholastic, this cognitive knowledge is prioritized. People who can express themselves verbally, who can actually go into theological discussions and so on, they feel very comfortable in this moment. What about other aspects of truth? As we know, Jesus says, my words are the truth. And we will say, yes, logos, give us the words, give us teachings of Jesus. But he says, I am the truth. So the moment person is seen as truth, as a whole person, wherever Christ is, the entire person, that breaks our method, it breaks our expectations, because that person is still alive, is still operating and functioning. It's not freezed and confined to the book 2000 years ago. Even though this is a normative account of Jesus Christ, the closest we get to understand who he was, but he still continues to live today through his spirit also, and immerses us on different levels. So I would say that our movement has a predisposition towards something that can be grasped intellectually, almost controlled, and fully explained or explained away. But sometimes we are less attuned to people who are actually more intuitive knowers, or musicians, or artists, or people who are communicating in different ways. So I just spent the weekend in Lyon, France, and I ended up in certain nice in a space where there was a jamming session. People from different traditions. There is no religious context there at all. We experienced, after this hours and hours of playing together, a type of unity that rarely you can experience in other places. And only in the end they realize, actually, I don't speak French. So there is something universal that connects us. There's a form of communication that can feel people. You can sense where they are, what their attributes are, what their tendencies, and so on. And you can get to know them without even speaking a word. So this is a witness to actually what music can do, and other forms of communication. And we are not fully exploiting them or exploring the potentials and actually kingdom possibilities and the possibility of sharing that kingdom to people, because we are addressing a part of the personality, not the entire person.
Yeah, I would really love to elaborate on that, Tihi. Thank you so much. For me, the foundational question that we deal with is, how do we make sense of the world in which we live, with its different facets and different traditions, different approaches to life. And as such, for me, it would be a reduction of the gospel if we would not perceive it as something encompassing, as it is portrayed by our master as the experience of the kingdom of God. And that raises for me the question of how encompassing is our notion or understanding of the kingdom of God. And if you would say we see it expressed wherever people come together, listen to each other, like in music, forgive each other, deal with life in a very fair way, try to forgive, try to make a sense of their journeys, even though they are difficult. Does our understanding of the kingdom of God encompass all those experiences, or only a cognitive understanding of which is shared with others? And for me, two things come together. That's where I am now. I believe the kingdom of God is very encompassing. Wherever people breathe, connect, share, grow, Christ is there, irrespective of how they may call that experience. So that broadens me to open my heart and my mind to see Jesus in the experiences of others who come from other backgrounds, and celebrate him through them, right? And as such, the concept of truth, thank you, T, for raising it. When Jesus said he is the truth, he is encompassing a type of integrity which brings life to words, right? Which brings them together. So wherever that is displayed in this world, Christ is around. And as such, coming to our tradition, Vanessa, I would like to say, I believe we have a fantastic tradition as Adventists, because we try to have a balanced view of the whole experience of being human. That's one of the things that attracted me to the Adventist Church years back. Spiritual, social, intellectual, mental aspects, bringing them together in a balanced way is very, very attractive, and for me profound in my experience, as it is displayed, for example, in the book Education by Ellen White. The question rather for me is, are we striking that balance, or do we have a leaning, right? That's what you're raising as well, Tihi. So I think it's about confronting ourselves with the holistic notion of our own tradition, which can, make us more wholesome and relatable to others in the communities where we are, I believe.
So I want to challenge you with a real case. I have a friend whose daughter is in the spectrum. She's in the autistic spectrum. And so she started reading about this and realizing that her daughter, while she speaks, there's a lot of nonverbal in her. And she realized that herself, while she communicates, she prefers nonverbal communication. And she said to me, Vanessa, there is no space in a traditional Adventist service for nonverbal Christians who connect with God in different ways. So I wonder if you can come up with examples in which, not necessarily for this, but for other people as well, in which we can open our spaces and actually invite people who feel unprocessed in different ways.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I come from the Presence Kulturlounge. That's a place where we bring people together here in Frankfurt. So we have music, we have art exhibitions, we cook together, we travel through cities once in a while. And that kind of creates a space where people can express themselves and engage with each other. And for me, that's one of the best kingdom experiences that I have. And if I may remark, we have like a team of some 10 persons coming from different religious traditions, Christian, Muslim, non-Christian, and now even a Buddhist friend joining in the team, right? So this is a place where I see Jesus through my team and how they experience life in dignity and creativity. So I think we have broad ways to experience it. I experienced that. And as Adventists, I think we can celebrate the places of education, the places of humanitarian support, the places of music and other activities as kingdom experiences, and not reduce them to a method for something bigger, right? Rather, I would say it's about finding the bigger experience of Christ in those experiences and making those connections. That's how I experience this. I don't know, Tihi, where you come from and how you see it.
Yeah, I do agree. There is a dictum which says, messenger is a message, so if you focus only on our message, what we share is about doctrines. I think this is still important. I don't want to juxtapose it. It is important, but to understand that we are actually who we are, how we embody this experience of kingdom today, how people can feel in our presence. They need to feel the taste of the eternal, the taste of the future, fuller manifestation of kingdom, to start to desire it, to start to open their hearts, not only their minds to it. So exposing to that, in this way, we can be this, we could create communities, and in our relationship, we could become that message of welcoming, message of inclusion, and where they can taste the signs of the kingdom already today. So I would actually see, if you take this paradigm of extending the kingdom as the basic framework for Christian mission, so I would define it this way: in response to what God is and what He does, we accept His invitation to extend His kingdom by, and I would then add, by creating authentic communities within which people can encounter Jesus Christ and be transformed by His Spirit into His disciples and find their place in God's cosmic story of reconciliation. It's a mindful, I am aware of it, but the idea is that we create meaningful spaces among ourselves, wherever 2 or 3 are in the name of Jesus. That's where Christ is. So they should be drawn to that community, that koinonia, that close-knit community, intimate community. And this is where their heart is opening in their mind to understand who this is, this kind of force or influence that I'm currently feeling in this community. And they are inquiring about theology. So I would see community not only as a means to spreading a gospel, but also end in itself. What was really changing from my perspective was actually, and challenging for my enlightenment notion, because I do like theology. I mean, from early childhood, I was just constantly reading Bible, Ellen White, all sorts of other books, you know. But Apostle John, the beloved disciple. So in the end of his ministry, he summarizes the entire apostolic project, whoever they are, what they live for, in very simple phrase, in an introductory sentence of his first epistle of John. And he says, whatever we have experienced and seen and touched, you know, so about the logos, about the word of life, we preach to you. So Adventists would say, we're saying, stopping here, saying, yes, we agree with that. We preach to you, we proclaim the gospel in the context of the angel messages. So whatever we experience, it's a real thing. It's a real deeper knowledge. We communicate this to you, but the text goes further, so that you can have koinonia or community with God and with us, vertical and horizontal. Yeah. So it's the point of preaching is to create the community with God and with others. When everything else stops in this world, when Christ comes, evangelization will stop. There will be no need for the type of proclamation that we currently have, but what stays is this unity with God and others. So I would see it as instrument of preaching the gospel, but also end in itself. So in this way, the community becomes the avenue of also God's revelation. And he ends then this prologue by saying, tell this to you so that your joy may be full or complete, or pleroma, the fullness. So you experience the flourishing, ultimate flourishing and full potential of what it means to be fully and truly human in the context of community. So you're asking now the question, so how do we preach? I would say maybe reverse the order, inviting them in community with us and with God. Let them experience God and let them ask the questions. And sometimes it can go the other way around also. You preach and then they respond in faith. Sometimes there'll be so many barriers in their mind that you actually have to expose them to the power of the Spirit and Christ for them to open up their minds and their hearts to God. So I think those two come as an organic whole. One should not be juxtaposed or put in hierarchically up or higher or lower. They will come as a compatible reality, community and experience of God, as well as theory and preaching about that experience.
So, I mean, I agree. I think there's nothing more practical than good theory. And I think teaching is a part of that. I wonder, however, if our emphasis sometimes is so much in preaching and talking that we don't actually listen first. What are your experiences on that? And how can we, I mean, this is...
È questa, la seguente, secondo me, Vanessa. Noi come ci approcciamo al prossimo? Ci approcciamo, cioè andiamo verso il prossimo per parlare, per predicare.
Kind of reflecting upon that, you know, as my brother said, when you experience something, you know it, right? When you experience the gospel, you know it, and we do that through people. So for me, the question is, do we expose ourselves to our communities in the church and beyond the church and basically see what is there? So for me, effective communication means dealing not with what I want to be there, but with what is actually there. Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a presentation at the Newbold College, speaking about music as a source of encountering God and Christ in its different forms. And I played this piece by Tord Gustafsson, that's a Norwegian pianist and jazz artist, as a form of prayer. And after I played that with the church leaders from the division, it was a moment of prayer. And afterwards, you know, union leaders and others came to me and said, hey, I went to this concert, you know, it inspired me so much. I went there, it was so powerful. And I went like, how is it that we don't speak about the things that make our eyes glow in our communities, right? So that's like the private self of the union leader, right? I'm using it as a metaphor, but when it comes to business, it's a little different, you know, in a way. the question I ask is, how can we create spaces in which people can express things that make their eyes glow, right? So for me, the challenge of communication, or as leaders on the different levels, is to see, do we have those places where people can express their voices, their ways of approaching the world, creativity, connecting, helping others? Or do we want to share what is important for us to others? Yeah. So for me, the invitation and the challenge is to create those spaces, to make them visible in our media, in the places we create in our churches, and to feature different aspects of the gospel experience in our journeys, or in this world, right, or in our communities. To make that visible would, I think, broaden our own experience, and the approach is like, and I'm experiencing it at the Cultural Lounge, is not like to say, come and listen to what I have to share with you, but saying, come and let what God has given you shine, right? And in that experience, I see, even with my non-Christian friends in the Cultural Lounge, when I let them shine, I learn from them, I grow, I get challenged, and they want to know about my journey, about my master, right? So my Buddhist friend is starting reading the Bible, by the way, the Sermon on the Mount, in the context of the war in Europe. He's saying, I want to read the Bible because I want to think how it can impact society. And I said, okay, read the Sermon on the Mount and make a presentation at the Cultural Lounge. So in a few weeks, my Buddhist friend is going to do a presentation about the Sermon on the Mount by Jesus, to speak about peace. And that way he engaged with the Bible, you see? And then he asks me back and says, Jesus, Simret, tell me more about your master. What would he say in this situation? I say, well, I have to think about it, right? So creating that space gives a space to express ourselves as well. So I think this is one of our main jobs as communicators, to create or nurture those spaces.
I'm sorry, I want to say something before you say something, Tihi, but I'm coming to you. I just wonder how many of us would feel comfortable with that, you know, to make space to let somebody else shine. What if they say something that we don't doctrinally agree with, you know? So I wonder whether we are prepared as a society, as a movement, as Adventists for that, to go like, actually, you come and you shine. You are the center here, not me. The focus of attention, not me.
That's a critical question. I think there is need. I like your phrasing, providing spaces where people can. How did you name it? Like where
shine.
Their eyes can shine, or they can experience a sense of wonder, or they can explore. And this was one of the key elements, I think, when I worked with, and I'm still working with students, providing the spaces that are somehow maybe less even official. We met maybe monthly like this on Zoom, and there was a section where we switched up the recording, and then we had they were expressing their doubts and their challenges, their concerns, and often there are statements that are completely off the target, but there needs to be in calculated space for error and for mistake and for challenge and for sharpening of the minds. If we are so concerned with doctrinal correctness, we might actually lose people who would have questions, but they would not dare ask because they'll be labeled. So this is exactly the space that I try to provide for students, where they can come with their worries, with their questions, even saying that I can't believe, I can't accept God. Okay, this is where you are in your story, in your journey. Let's see what comes as a next step, so you can engage where they are currently. So I think this safe space is Lehman zones, no man's land almost. That has to be part of it. If not officially from the pulpit, I don't think that we need to necessarily go frontally like that, because it can fire back. But there has to be an intentional space for that exploration.
Absolutely. Okay. A lot to think about. Absolutely a lot to think about. I'm going to pivot a bit, because I know, Tihi, you're strong on storytelling as a tool to share the gospel and using our own personal stories. So I wonder, how can we use our personal stories or sharpen our storytelling abilities to share the message of God in a compelling way while keeping. Sometimes I feel like we're so good with putting words together, but not remaining authentic and emotionally vulnerable in what we say. And so I wonder if personal storytelling might be an avenue for that.
There are recent theories, they call it social narrative theories of identity, that there is that our identities are somehow shaped by stories that we subscribe to. And this day is an evolving story within each one of us, internalized, evolving story. And this story help us make sense of different events, different personalities, different stages of our life. And I think the key is actually connecting your previous point about listening to people's stories, where they are exactly in their journey, what drives their story, what makes them tick, what moves them, and what will help them come to the next step. So this takes time. And we live in a very fast culture, fast-paced culture, where people are, they only have time for basic information about another person. The moment you try to share something more, they just switch off. You can see their eyes are blank. We don't have patience to sit like before around the fire and listen to each other's stories, which actually reveals so much about our identity. And interestingly, when Apostle Peter when the apostles met, they didn't know each other. What did they do? Historizo. Means tells the histories or the stories. So I think patience to hear other people's stories and where God is in their life. That's the key skill before you even start to communicate to them. We actually have that. We have this exercise in our classes here at Newbold when, first of all, we engage into 360 degrees listening process. Okay, and this is not only listening to what they say, but what are the emotions behind? What are what drives there? What are the values that shape them? Sometimes not everything is at the level of explicit knowledge. It's a level of implicit knowledge, something that that's underneath the surface. So you spend time with the person, you relate to the person, you listen to their stories, and then aha, this is where they stand. This is what what their main drivers are, and so on. And only then you can then think about what aspects of God's revelation of gospel will be relatable to them. What can I use as pointers to faith? If a person is not so much cerebral, then you will not necessarily go with a cosmological argument, theological argument, all sorts of fine-tuning argumentation. You will actually deal with a topic of relationality or longing or desire or beauty or other avenues that you can use to approach them. But you can't know that before spending with time and listening to their stories, how they express themselves, how they see themselves. I think a great example, I don't know whether we're doing it now or later, but Apostle Paul, for me, is a brilliant example of intercultural communicator and how he listened. You know that he was a Jew, also having been trained by Gamaliel and others, like famous rabbis and so on. So he knew inside out Judaism, but he knew also inside out the classical Greek, the Greek philosophy and so on. And he was Roman citizen. So he has three in one person. And for me, just hearing his epistles through this prism of who he communicates to, you can see how he's juggling many different balls. He knows that Jews are very concerned about the concept of light, let's say the moral living, enlightenment. For them, it's not just intellectual thing, it's the way you live. He knows that they spend most of their life chasing that. How do we live a righteous life? The life of light. And Torah in itself, or means light, yeah? So then he knows Romans who are all about the gnosis, about the intellect, about the knowledge. Sorry, these are Greeks. He knows that Romans actually gave us the social categories and all their social climbing to the letter, from the slave, from the freedman to the plebeians, to the people who are decision makers and so on. So he knows that they're driven by the notion of glory. So here it is. He is now surrounded by nations that have certain quest that underlines everything that they do, the educational system, their lifestyle, and so on. And he wants to communicate the gospel. And he then does it, let's say, just an example. It's, for me, it's this brilliant thing. So now, remember, so for Jews, he wants to use light, for Greeks, knowledge, and for Romans, glory. He then writes in 2 Corinthians 4:6, he says, "For it is God who said, let the light shine out of darkness." I mean, this is very potent statement for Jews, let there be light, God says, who also shone in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. So what did he just do? The moment he said light, all the eyes of Jews are open because he knows their story. He knows what drives, he knows what's behind their word, behind everything that they do, light. He connects that drive to Jesus Christ. In the face of Jesus Christ, you can find the ultimate Torah, the ultimate way, Torah, the lived reality. To Romans, he says, he's a king who came down the ladder to become the slave, so we can also rule with him. So the glory, through him, you can get the glory, social status. And to Romans, he says, through him, you can know the mysteries of the universe and have the knowledge. So knowledge and glory and light, everything is hidden in Jesus Christ. That's why they listen to him, because he knows the language, he knows what drives them, and you can't get that without listening.
That's so beautiful to hear. Maybe a few words on that. I really love that. In a sense, I believe it's about integrating the different layers of our stories, right, and relating to them. And I do believe that Paul, as you beautifully put it, did not only share it, but he experienced it in his own journey, right? And maybe the notion of grace is emphasized as well because he has experienced it. And I'm wondering how we are able to integrate the multiple layers of our own stories and celebrate and respect the stories of others as well. And how can those stories come together? How about the gospel being a place where the multiple layers of our stories and multiple sources of identity to which we attach ourselves are made visible in a safe zone so that we can grow together? A place where Hagar's story is important as Sarai's story, right? And how do we bring them together? And that, in a way, for me, coming back to what we said earlier on, has also with sharing power. Yeah, I think we want to be in control of narratives, but we need to let go and be surprised. And that's the space of the Spirit. I think the louder we proclaim, the louder we control, the more scared we are. Yeah, that things might be problematic. But the more we integrate our own journeys and the different layers of our identities and engage with them, that's work enough. Yeah, for me, Ethiopian, German, Orthodox, Adventist, so many layers I need to deal with. But and personal story as well, to integrate that and deal with that and giving others space to do so. I believe that's the place of the gospel where Christ can shine through, as you put it, in a powerful way for all of us. So I think we need to let go as well to make that possible and have the courage again to deal with our stories and to bring them to the fore.
There is such beauty in the complementary of the things you guys are saying. Wow, my mind is exploding, as you speak, because I was listening to Tihi thinking, okay, I think he might be saying that we need to know the audience, we need to know the people before we speak, or we'll be answering questions that no one is ever asking, not even asking. But then comes Simret and adds a beautiful layer of depth into it, going like, you also need to know yourself and the stories that travel within your own journey of life and generations before and after, so that you understand how your own story might color the way you interpret the stories of others, and allow the gospel to blend those things together into a super meaning, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This is exactly, I think, what in Newbold there is one module called Engaging Contemporary European Culture, and it's taught by Pastor and Dr. Wayne Erasmus, so who also had the background in narrative analysis and narrative counseling. So he structured the whole module like this, that you're examining first your own story. What is the story? Because each person has to know the story 2,000 years old about Christ, but you need to also know Christ today. So what is your story with Christ today? Actually, even without Christ, in generally, what's your story? And as Simret noticed, we are often a very composite beings that we inhabit multiple stories. And then you move on, what is the story of the other, the person you want to serve, the person you want to encounter? and recognizing the complexity when this story becomes also the story of the community, because every person brings their own story. And only then they talk about the story of God and how that story of God suddenly helps you make sense of our stories, human stories. It's almost like often we are too, he said, often we are too big a player in too small a story. Okay, only Wayne can kind of think of this kind of memorable phrases. Too big a player into smaller story. People they need stories in order to wrap up the sense of importance and self into the whale of significance. So everybody tells stories. This is how we make sense of life. But once they hear the story within which their own personal story makes more sense, once they see it, they can never unsee it. So I think we should learn the way how to tell the gospel. Essentially is a story about God and what he does to us, for us. So we need to learn to say it in a way that positions their own story. And suddenly when they take these glasses, the story of the gospel, and they see their own life, things start to fall in place, saying, aha, this is why I live. This is why I feel this urge. This is why I feel all this thing. And, and suddenly it's a full resolution, almost like this story should help them transition from black and white old TV screen to maybe high color screen with a full spectrum of colors, but not even that, to HD, but not even HD, but 4K or 8K quality resolution. Because the moment you see the movie from 8K quality, you never want to go back to the initial TV, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So I think there is self-authenticating value of the story once they see life through that, and it helps them see things coherently. It accords to their reality. It's universal enough to encompass everything that they know, and it has explanatory power. It brings things into sharper focus. That's the strongest argument that we can provide. It's not only rational, it also addresses the heart, because heart knows the reason that reason knows nothing about, as Blaise Pascal would say. So we need to make them wish that this is true, and then show them how it is true. So I think the story has this unleashing power. Martin Luther would say the gospel is like a caged lion. You don't need to defend it, just release it.
That's
So
so good.
Once you release the gospel is strong enough to actually just completely transform you.
Defend itself.
You don't need to defend the lion. You don't need to defend the gospel. Just release it. And I think telling that story that helps to release people, to liberate people, and make sense of their own life, that's the most powerful tool we can have.
Amen.
Yeah.
I am going to attempt a summary of some of the topics we touched on. And I know this is a teaser, because this could be like a 3-week-long conversation. And then I'm going to open up the room for questions. You can, someone already started adding them in the chat. So we started talking about open minds and open hearts, and how this means the courage to be real with myself, to be vulnerable, to go to places where the gospel will take me that might not be the places I wanted to be. We talk about relational knowledge and embodiment. We talk about creating places where people can shine, where people can be authentic. And we talked about listening before we speak. And we talked about story as well, and knowing others and knowing ourselves, and how all that plays a role in communicating well and in releasing the lion, really, rather than keeping it in a cage of our own understanding and knowledge. Thank you. Wow, I'm so honored. Thank you so much that you are putting time to do this. I'm going to start sharing questions with you now, unless you want to say something else to this very, very, very short summary. No?
Vanessa, it was poetic. It was beautiful. I'm blessed already. So.
Good, thank you.
What you shared as well, Tihi. It's a great experience.
Yeah, someone came up with a question that I had written down, because when you encounter people who read a lot, I always ask them to recommend books to me. So someone wrote here, Peter wrote here, what books do the speakers recommend on these or similar topics? We touch on many, so maybe recommend more than one book that could be inspirational for people to carry on reading and learning about this.
Okay, so there are many books, but let's say I am aware that people live in a fast lifestyle. You possibly don't have time to spend like reading volumes after volume. You want something like you can read maybe in 2 hours and give you the whole framework. something that we use for our classes in Christian apologetics is the book Mere Apologetics from Alistair McGrath. And he then goes into analyzing how do you go understand the audience that you're talking to? How do you then, second thing, how do you understand the aspects of the message that you need to share with them? And then what are the gateways, what are the avenues you can use to share that? You're talking about the power of story, of narrative apologetics, argumentation, symbols, images, arts, and also other avenues. And I think each person should develop their own apologetic style. And apologetic, I don't necessarily mean just defending faith, but also commending faith. So that it's almost like holding the diamond against the light. So it scintillates. You can see its lasting beauty and value by seeing different angles and how it just shines. So this is what you want to do, commend faith. So people desire it, show its imaginative appeal, its aesthetic appeal, its cognitive appeal, and so on. So they are attracted to that. And then there is also aspect of apologetic, which is then translating, finding the right idea, language, the right avenues, the right patterns of thoughts that you want to communicate to, and so on. So I think that book would be a good one to start with as an easy read, but immediately followed up by Paul Gould's Cultural Apologetics. He then explores the human quest for goodness, like ethics, aesthetics, or quest for beauty, and meaning, reason, how to use those, and then use also stories and so on to engage these different quests of people. So Paul Gould, Cultural Apologetics, and there is a more recent book like Narrative Apologetics and so on from Alistair McGrath also, but there is a whole list. I could send the suggestions to you that you can use, but this is an easy read to get you into the field.
Thank you.
Maybe a book from my side as well, not so methodological, but in a sense of how to approach this world with an open heart, with an open mind. He's a very influential reading for me, which had a great impact on my journey, is by an individual called Abraham Joshua Heschel, and the book is called God in Search of Man. God in Search of Man by Abraham Heschel. He is basically a Jewish theologian and philosopher who invites us to see the presence of God in this world and brings that together with the works of the prophets and the Torah. He brings those two worlds together, and so it's on a very paradigmatic level. It opens a view to engage with this world in the light of God, I would say. So it's been very influential in my journey. I can recommend that. And yeah, concerning this holistic notion of living, definitely Education by Ellen White, something practical. Furthermore, someone who really invites me from Christian thinkers at the moment is called Cornel West. Maybe you've heard about him. He's an African-American thinker, Baptist guy, preacher, theologian, philosopher, activist, very inspirational because he brings the gospel and society together in a very narrative way, sharing his story. So those are some of my inspirations, and maybe one or two more inspirations. I've already mentioned John Coltrane, for those who like jazz. For those who love classics, Arvo Pärt is like an Estonian composer whom I love, a fantastic composer who brings peace to my mind. At the moment, those are where my inspirations are.
So, Sina, listening to your story, I'm learning so much about you. We have a lot of overlaps and overlapping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't wait to catch up more.
Thank you so much. I always love book recommendations. It's such a gift from people. Thank you so much. There's another question by Isaac. He says, vulnerability is so powerful, but please, why do you think most people, Adventist Christians, are afraid to be vulnerable?
It's hard because the tradition that aims for holiness, and for kind of moral, right doctrines, right living, right way of doing things. If you transgress some of the unspoken rules, sometimes the community can be merciless, or less than open. You can be labeled, you can be framed, and not all of them are like that. I don't think that this applies to the entire church, but there is tendency to judging, So I think that people usually faced with fear, they don't open up. But I guess I think there are spaces for that in smaller groups and other places that we can start with changing the culture.
Yeah. I would add to that, besides our contexts being more propositional, it's easier to make propositional statements than to share about our journeys, right? And I think in a way, I think we're there because we're scared a little to face ourselves, to face life as it is. We'd rather have life as we want it to be. And it's easier to hide ourselves behind sermons or, speaking about propositions. I think it has to do with courage to actually engage with our own journeys. And my experiences, even in our church, in the church context where I work, if someone finds courage to share, others open up as well. Yeah. But it is, I think we're a little scared of that because we're not always prepared to face whatever there is to be faced, let alone to share it, right? And I believe though, that's what Jesus does. He confronted Paul with his own story, right? Or Peter. He relates to us where we are and challenges us to encompass and challenge our stories and open up. That's where the gospel lies, I believe. So we need more of those spaces by having the courage to take the first step.
And the way to change this culture is actually, you need to be intentional, let's say, to include, even in our communal worship, maybe spaces for stories, and people tell the stories of how they experience God, the Spirit in their life, what did God do with them, in them, through them, around them, and provide the space and appreciation where people are in their journey. And I think, as Simret said, the moment we nurture this culture, I did notice also in our church, the moment you are transparent and honest, there is not only judgment, there really people open up. Later you get their emails, you get their, they get in touch and then relate to that. It's just nurturing the culture of speaking about it, sharing the stories, personal ones, not only the biblical one.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in honesty, in integrity and vulnerability, but I wonder if either of you wants to perhaps have a quick comment on oversharing and being vulnerable in wrong places.
Absolutely. Jesus said, "Be wise as the serpents." He was very smart. There were things he would share. There were things he would not share. There was a timing for it in the course of his ministry. Even among his disciples, he shared different things, right? Based on the time. We need to be smart, and we need to learn and go like, there is a time for everything. That is so important. Context and time and wisdom and intention and motivation matters a lot. So there is a lot of grace in not sharing as just in sharing. So I think that's very important.
All right. One more question. I think this was probably translated by Google, so I'm going to adapt it a little bit. Gloria says, I have a question. There was a listening program mentioned. I think this refers to what you said about Newbold, Tihi. What does it, and where can we have more information or activities about this? I think it's referring to the training you were talking about, that they listen to your emotions and what is said, but also what is being felt.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about experiencing God today through the Spirit, Spirit is still a lived reality. So it's experiential reality, and always points to Christ, of course, but can be experienced in different domains. So we monitor different domains. Let's say how He speaks within you, maybe producing spiritual fruit. Like different new motives, different virtues, different. That He changes you, He enlightens you, He maybe connects you, opens you up for others. So you're monitoring what His Spirit is doing within you. And then what Spirit is doing around you. So what is God up to around you? So asking that question and praying to see what is God doing in the life of this teenager who is struggling with this and that. What is like doing this elderly lady's life, and so on. So it's listening where God is, what He's already working on. It's a mission of God, not our mission. We don't have to do a mission for God. We are rather invited to be participating in His mission. So He's already busy with them. And the question is whether He wants to reveal to us what He's up to, because His revelation is our invitation, you know. And then you can experience Him working through you, through your spiritual gift, and manifesting Himself through you. So I think this kind of experimentation, we have different questions that guide our almost like self-monitoring process and trying to see where we are in our life. So we practice that aspect of listening. When we want to listen to the context, the story around, we have the pestle framework talking about where is God in domains of politics in this place, in domains of culture, in domains of ecology, economy, and pestle is an acronym, yeah. So you want to see God in different aspects of the life of certain community, and see what the story are they a part of. So you're listening that, and only then you want to see what God can use you for. So often what we find is God's calling for us where our heart's greatest gladness and the world's greatest need meet. So in that triangle where God is within us and around us, that's where we need to position ourselves, and then we'll be riding on the currents of grace, the currents of the wave, the currents of God's Spirit. And we'll be participating in the mission of God. So we have these exercises, intentional exercises, how to learn to listen. There are different authors that you can use, particularly in the tradition of fresh expressions in England. You know how Anglican Church was going down, losing membership rapidly. And then 2004, they had this synod and they said, okay, we have to do something about this. And then Robert Williams came and he said, okay, let's listen. And everybody is very impatient when somebody does that, because we are wasting our time. No, he went around different pubs in different places in England, and he spent the entire year just traveling in different dioceses, or how to say, yeah, and he was listening to what were the conversation, what was the need, and he was then encouraging them, just drawing God where you see Him, you know. So once you hear God, once you see what He's up to, do that. And this is how the Fresh Expression started. More than 500 communities emerged from that, and then gospel is reaching the type of people in places, in different pores of society that otherwise the classical church could not enter. So I think this is a good case study for us to see what it means to listen. It's listening what God is doing within you, what He's doing around you, and then what He wants to do through you in that context.
So we have one last question, and then I'm going to give each of you maybe like a minute to share one last thought to take home with us. So the last question, let me see if I can find it, is from Sonia. She says, Simret, do you have a title from the African theologian you were recommended? It'll be easier to find him on Amazon.
Sure. A Jewish philosopher, theologian, the African American. Okay, sure. The Cornel West, Cornel West, like the West. I can't write now because I'm using my smartphone. Check him out on YouTube, Cornel West, and you'll find a lot of resources about that African American brother. And what I want to say down that line as well of vulnerability and this context of our sharing, and maybe in a way that might be my final statement as well. Would be, be feelable, I think we don't have to say everything, but we need to be feelable. And that can only happen when we engage with ourselves honestly, right? And that's the challenge. So if you are in touch with yourself, you don't have to say much. Sometimes you won't even say a word, but you are feelable. You'll feel yourself and others feel you. And that's a very challenging place to go sometimes. And down that line, my statement would be, God is at work in this world, everywhere, in people's lives, in different shapes and forms, and be open to trace it, to find it, and to listen, actually, and come to you in ways that may surprise you. that may surprise you, because God can do whatever he wants to do through whomever he wants to do, and he wants to reach you, he wants to reach us. And so the kingdom of God is broad. He reaches out to us in various ways and forms through people of different backgrounds, and let us have the openness to engage, and let's give room as communicators, as pastors, as leaders, space for people to shine, to express themselves, to share their gifts, their talents, and we'll see it coming back to us as a blessing. So this is basically my wish.
Thank you. Tihi.
I think listening requires humbleness, because if you think that you know everything, you will not listen. You will give them prescription to the patients without even diagnosing or without being aware of what the problem is. So we often try to spoon food and force feed people, but because we are giving them something that they actually don't need. So I think humbleness means stop for a moment, actually hear what God is up to. It's his mission. Don't approach with the attitude, we know it all, we know all the doctrines, all the stories, because we might be surprised that this communication enriches both sides. Like Apostle Peter, who gets into a situation, the Spirit is talking to the Gentile, shocks him, and he is actually the one not only blessing the Gentile, but Gentile blesses him, and they're both progressing. So when God acts, it's beyond us. We can't take the credit for it, and it's larger than us. And I think the fundamental attitude of humbleness leading to listening is absolutely necessary if you want to be part of God's mission. Even Jesus himself, maybe the verse to end with, in John 5, 19 and 20, I think Jesus says, the Son does know nothing on his own, but Father loves him, and then he shows him what he's doing, and then the Son does the same. And then the great things happen, and he promises that we can experience the same thing the same way. So what he's saying is, it's a mission of God. Son comes, Father in the relationship reveals to him what he's up to, and then he joins the Father. So I think that's the way to do it. Listen to their story, listen to your story, to God's story, and when God reveals to you, this is how they converge, those stories, and this is how suddenly the gospel with its power will be unleashed, like that lion, powerful lion. Then when you step in, it's not your work, it's God's work.
Amen. That was great. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. This has been an absolute honor. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. I'm taking, so be feelable and be humble. Wow. Those are very good and very powerful messages. Thank you, everyone, as well, who tuned in today. Yes, we are recording this, and it will be available on our website, so you can share it with friends who were not able to be here with us tonight. I wonder if either David or Paulo can remind me when is our next meeting, because it's escaping me right now. We have one meeting every month, the last Tuesday. Is it today's Tuesday? Yes, the last Tuesday of each month. So the next one will be the last Tuesday of next month. And it'll be actually David Neal who will be speaking next time. So we really hope to see you there. And thank you ever so much for tuning in today. The 30th of March, thank you, Paulo Maceda. The 30th of March will be our next meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. And we will share the content online in a couple of days. Thank you so much for tuning in today.